When I was around 12 years old, my world was turned upside down when my parents divorced. Their separation was surprising because everything had seemed normal just before that. One day, they sat me down and announced that they were getting divorced. I couldn't believe it at first. I thought they were joking, as I had heard from friends that divorces came with loud arguments and emotional chaos. Instead, my parents had a quiet divorce. They explained that they had both fallen in love with other people. My mom planned to move out with her new boyfriend, and my dad's new partner would be moving into our house. They told me they would share custody of me. This meant I would be moving between two homes, as they both would live only 2 miles apart. I had no say in this decision, and it felt like my family was falling apart right before my eyes. I could only sit there and cry. My parents assured me that they would always put me first and promised me gifts like new video games, vacations, and anything else I wanted. But none of those things mattered to me. What I really wanted was for my family to stay together. It hurt to watch my mom leave with her packed bags and to see my dad's new partner take over my home. My parents had separated on good terms, and soon my stepmom gave birth to twin boys who were nearly my age. They didn't like me, just like I didn't like them. My mom's boyfriend had a daughter from a previous marriage, but she lived with her mother. I thought about spending more time with my mom, but soon after she moved in with her boyfriend, she became pregnant. Everything felt strange and complicated. At both my parents' houses, I felt unwelcome. My mom's new partner made me uncomfortable, and their public displays of affection were hard to witness. In my dad's home, the situation was similar. My stepmom and her sons didn't want me there, so I increasingly turned to my aunt, my father's sister, who was also my godmother. She was 10 years older than my dad and lived alone. I started visiting her more frequently, and after about a year of shuffling between my parents' homes, I decided to stay with my aunt permanently. It took my parents more than 3 months to realize I was no longer living with them. Mom thought I was with dad, and dad thought I was with mom. They were so wrapped up in their new lives that they didn't even bother to check on me. My aunt was my savior during this time. She made me feel loved and wanted. We would go out for dinners and catch movies together. During the summer, we visited my grandpa at his farm in the countryside, which was always a joy. Living with her was fun. Initially, my dad would send my monthly allowance to my aunt, but over time, he started to miss those payments. Sometimes, my aunt would kindly remind them, and other times, she would just let it go. I felt guilty for not contributing, so I started working for her. She owned a plant nursery, and after school, I would help out. I ran errands for her, took out the trash, and did household chores. It felt good to be active and contribute to her home. Meanwhile, my parents seemed to forget they even had a son. They forgot to call me on my birthdays, and only when my aunt would remind them would I receive a call with an "I love you." Even when I got sick, my aunt would inform them, but they never came to check on me. They didn't show up on my graduation day either. It was my aunt who brought me joy and support that day. Whenever my aunt called them out for their neglect, they would then reach out to me and apologize. This lack of attention from my parents filled me with resentment, and I eventually stopped answering their calls. Eventually, they stopped calling altogether and accused me of being the rude one for distancing myself from them. Over time, my relationship with my parents grew strained, resulting in rudeness and a complete lack of communication from their side. They stopped answering my calls, and it became clear that they were more interested in playing a blame game than reaching out to me. I made my feelings known by telling them that if they wished to blame me for whatever grievances they had, they could do so without me. I had decided that I did not want them in my life. After finishing school, I moved on to university and left my aunt's home. However, I still made it a point to visit her every few months. I attended her birthdays and holidays because, over the years, a strong bond had formed between us. Now, I find myself in my final year at university. About 3 months ago, I faced a heartbreaking moment when my grandfather, on my father's side, passed away. This was a painful experience for both my aunt and me, as we were the closest to him. In stark contrast, my dad and my uncles barely visited him during his illness. It was ironic that they all showed up for his funeral and gathered at the lawyer's office to discuss his will. Much to their surprise, Grandpa had left everything to my aunt, his vast 150-acre farmland, the farmhouse, and a significant sum of $1 million in cash. The remaining funds were donated to charity. While this may seem harsh, knowing my grandfather's situation helps put things into perspective. I plan to share more about the backstory in another thread. My grandfather had been ill for a long time, and despite my aunt's efforts to get her brothers to visit him, none of them came to see him during his final days. I had moved out for university by that time, but my aunt was the one who cared for him. Once she received her inheritance, she called me home. I considered her house to be my true home. She informed me that she would be giving me the $1 million that my grandfather had left for her. The overwhelming joy I felt was indescribable. It wasn't just about the money, but rather the realization that she genuinely cared for me all those years. During my time living with her, I often talked about my dreams of starting my own company and hiring employees. When she handed me the money, she encouraged me to use it to pursue my dreams. I hugged her tightly and cried, feeling grateful for her support. Without her, my life would have been very different. However, it didn't take long for the news of my inheritance to reach my parents. Suddenly, they began showering me with attention and what they claimed to be unconditional love. They started calling and checking in on me, but I firmly told them to back off. I didn't want them back in my life. Just last week, my dad showed up at my dorm. He must have gotten my address from my aunt, and I suspected that none of them knew which university I was attending. He expressed his pride in my upcoming graduation, showering me with compliments. Then, he asked why I hadn't been visiting his home. I countered by asking when he last called. He fell silent for a moment before saying, "Oh, you're still mad at us over the divorce? Come on, move on. We both love you. Your mother misses you too. Let me drive you home so we can all have dinner together." I firmly stated, "The only family I have is my aunt. You both abandoned me long ago, so stop pretending you care." I added, "I know why you're here. It's because of the $1 million. He fell silent again and denied having any ulterior motives, insisting that he was there simply out of love. He claimed he wanted to apologize and hoped to be part of my life again. He mentioned my graduation and expressed a desire to be invited, unlike during my school graduation when I had not reached out to them. The thought of conversing with him filled me with frustration, so I left him mid-sentence claiming I had class. Later that day, I received a voicemail from my mom. She mentioned that she was expecting an invitation to my graduation. She and my dad couldn't attend university but had always dreamed of me going. She sounded genuinely excited about my achievement. Despite this, I felt no desire to have either of my parents by my side on such an important day. I shared my feelings with my aunt, who said it was ultimately my decision. However, she suggested that I consider reconciling with my parents. This left me confused. I questioned whether their intentions were genuine or if they were merely motivated by the inheritance. As for an update, life has kept me busy, but I have some good news. I graduated from university and even landed a job. Thank you for the support. I also want to address some common questions I received in the comments regarding my aunt. Many people were curious about her family and how she managed to take care of me for so many years. In my initial post, I mentioned that my aunt is 10 years older than my dad. When I moved in with her, she was in her late 50s and single. Her husband had tragically passed away in an accident when I was very small, probably around 1 or 2 years old. She has a daughter, my cousin, who had moved out during her teenage years to pursue medical school. Now, my cousin is a cardiologist and has settled in the UK. So, my aunt has been living alone ever since. After her husband died, she did not date any men. Despite my cousin and I trying to set her up with a few potential partners, she firmly declined every time. She often expressed that she loved her plants and found happiness in caring for them, which gave her a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Some readers have commented that I was too harsh on my parents, suggesting they have the right to separate and remarry. While it is true they have the freedom to choose their partners and pursue their own happiness, it is never justified to ignore your children once a new family enters your life. My own parents did just that. They neglected me after they formed new relationships. Initially, they promised I would spend 1 week at my dad's house and then 1 week at my mom's. However, as time went on, their schedules often meant I was left out of their plans. They would take turns picking me up, and it felt like it was always on their terms. They would sometimes discuss their dinner plans in front of me, saying things like, "Oh, it's my time to have you," while planning outings I wouldn't be part of. When your parents behave like this, it can be incredibly hurtful. I have mentioned my mom before. After she moved in with her boyfriend, she became pregnant within a few months. They engaged in public displays of affection that were uncomfortable for me, especially as a child. I remember one 2-day trip they took, where I was made to sit in the room while they enjoyed themselves outside. I was only 11, but I was aware of what was going on, and it was deeply unsettling for me. I could hear everything happening. It was uncomfortable to think that I was there while they acted like nothing mattered but their relationship. This situation made it impossible for me to feel comfortable around them, leading me to stop visiting my mom altogether. While my dad was somewhat better, he still struggled to include me in plans. Occasionally he would attempt to include me, but his stepsons often threw tantrums, leading him to reschedule activities. He would say, "Okay, maybe next week," but that next week would never come since I would be at my mom's during that time. I soon realized that my parents must have had an unspoken agreement. Whenever they needed to ditch me, they would push it off to the next week, and the responsibility for me would shift from one to the other. Once, I was dragged along on a family vacation with my dad and his new wife and her sons. It was a dreadful experience. On the first day, I felt entirely neglected as they focused on each other. Even when it came to family photos, I was made to take pictures of them while I wasn't included in any of them. There were only 4 photos of me, and 3 were solo shots. Only one included my dad. I believe I have provided enough context for those who suggested I was too harsh towards my parents. Now addressing the current situation, my parents expressed a desire to reconnect with me, claiming they wanted to be part of my graduation day. They expressed that this was a proud moment for them and that they wanted to celebrate it together. However, I felt strongly that I did not want them there on my special day. They were absent during my high school graduation, busy with their new families and responsibilities. When they pressed me further, I said I didn't invite them but would consider it. I even secured extra tickets in case they showed up uninvited. However, they didn't attend. They completely forgot about it and went to their own convocation. I had explicitly told my mom not to share the graduation dates with my parents, and now, it has been nearly a month since that day with no call or message from them. It felt like my graduation was merely an excuse for them to try and reintegrate into my life. Fast forward to now, about 2.5 months after my graduation, my mom called to tell me that my half-sister had graduated from primary school and has now been enrolled in a private elementary school. However, they are struggling financially and were reaching out for help. They were facing a serious shortage of funds, and she wanted me to pitch in financially. I was taken aback by her request. When I asked her to explain why she believed I should help, she abruptly stated that she was my sister, and therefore, I should support her education. She wasted no time getting to the point, revealing that our aunt had given her $1 million inheritance to me. Of course, I knew that. Then she insisted that I needed to step up as the big brother. I had to interrupt her right there. This was utterly absurd. I had never even met the sister she was talking about. Where was she when I needed my mother during times of sickness and struggle? She was nowhere to be found. At that moment, she began sobbing, saying that if I was still holding on to past grievances, it was a shame. She claimed that I had a large sum of money now, and questioned what I intended to do with it if not help my sister get an education at a private school. I had a mountain of thoughts racing through my mind, but I decided not to voice them. Instead, I simply told her that I had plans for the money and could not spare a cent for anyone else. After that, she abruptly ended the call. It struck me that her love for family seemed to only materialize when she thought there was money involved. I was still trying to process the entire situation when I received a surprising phone call from a bank. They contacted me regarding my father's defaulted mortgage. When I asked how they obtained my number, they explained that my dad had provided it to them. He had taken out a personal loan, and when he fell behind on the mortgage payments, he had instructed the bank to reach out to me because he had run out of funds. Initially, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I had no idea how the whole process worked, and I was terrified that I might be legally obligated to take on his debt simply because I was his son. Fortunately, I was able to maintain my composure. I told the bank representatives that I needed to discuss the matter with my father first. Instead of reaching out to him, I decided to contact a friend of mine who was studying law. Although he wasn't yet a licensed lawyer, he was knowledgeable about these matters. After explaining the situation, he reassured me that I was not legally bound to pay my father's debts. I was relieved but still puzzled as to why the bank was contacting me in the first place. He explained that recovery agents often seek payment from anyone willing to cover the borrower's debts, but I had every right to refuse. After learning this, I chose not to contact my father. I knew he would likely plead with me to help pay his mortgage, but I also realized that I had no obligation to do so. I waited for the bank to call me again, and sure enough, they reached out a week later, asking when I would be making the payment. The recovery agent's tone was aggressive, aimed at intimidating me. The first time they called, I had felt intimidated, but this time was different. I stood my ground and firmly questioned their authority, reminding them that I had not defaulted on anything. I told them to adjust their tone and that I wouldn't be paying any money. They needed to contact the person who had actually defaulted, which was my father. To my surprise, they apologized and ended the call. I didn't feel the need to give them a lecture, but I wanted to ensure they directed their frustration toward the original borrower. A few hours later, I received a phone call from my father's wife. I couldn't bring myself to refer to her as my mom or stepmom. She was furious with me, demanding to know what I had said to the recovery agents that had angered them so much. She claimed they had confronted my father roughly, threatening him to pay up or face severe consequences. I remained silent, simply stating that I had told them to focus on the actual borrower and not me. She yelled at me, accusing me of lacking compassion for my father. She argued that he was struggling to keep up with the mortgage and implied that I should step up, especially considering the wealth I had acquired. I coldly responded that I had no sympathy for him because he never showed any concern for me. His concern has always been directed toward her and her children, so I asked why she didn't contribute to his finances, as I was sure he would take money from them without hesitation. The conversation abruptly ended when she hung up on me. That same evening, my father called. He was intoxicated, not angry, but sobbing. He expressed regret for his past mistakes, admitting that he had not treated me well in front of his new family. He offered apologies and acknowledged how wrong he had been, claiming he wanted to make things right. I responded by telling him that I did not want to dwell on the past any longer. I want to make it clear that discussing my past is not something I am interested in. I firmly believe that the people from that time in my life should not be allowed back in. Recently, I had a conversation where someone expressed regret for their previous actions and pleaded with me for forgiveness. I responded by saying that I felt sorry for them, but their remorse no longer holds any weight with me. Over time, I have learned how to live my life independently, without their presence or influence, and I would like to continue living this way. When it comes to the decision of whether or not to help him financially, I find myself conflicted. I feel a pang of guilt thinking about how he was pursued by bank officials as a result of his situation. It even crosses my mind that this could all be a setup to emotionally manipulate me into giving him money. If he had approached me directly with a request for help, I would have outright refused, just as I did when my mom asked for assistance. After sharing my thoughts, I received some valuable feedback from others. A few people pointed out that it wouldn't have been a big deal for me to support him for a couple of months with his mortgage payments. I have to admit, I also considered that possibility. However, deep down, I still believe that neither he nor my mom deserves my assistance. After I expressed my feelings in the last update, I felt so conflicted that I almost reached out to my dad to ask how much he needed. But before I could do that, I received an email from my mom inviting me to dinner. She expressed her regrets for not being able to attend my graduation day, and suggested this meal would be a chance for us to spend time together, just the three of us, my dad, her, and me, like old times. Although the idea of reminiscing about our family's past didn't excite me, I accepted the invitation. I wanted to see how things would unfold. When I arrived, both of my parents were talking about the same things I had heard from my dad earlier. They were filled with apologies, expressing remorse, and seeking forgiveness while hoping to bring our family back together. I nodded and smiled in response, simply going along with the flow to see where this would lead. Out of the blue, my mom asked about my plans for the money I had. When I looked at her, she clarified that she and my dad could offer me guidance on investments since I was quite young and might need help making financial decisions. I casually replied that I was already working with someone on that front, so I was fine, thanks. An awkward silence followed, and then my mom suddenly said, "You know, your dad has been facing trouble because he defaulted on his mortgage." I acknowledged that I was aware of the situation and questioned why my dad had taken out a personal loan for his business. He lowered his head and admitted it was for his son's college expenses. Before I could respond, my mom interjected, emphasizing that it didn't matter what the purpose was, the main issue was that we needed to help my dad. I thought to myself that a better solution would be for her to settle his mortgage, and he could pay her back later. As I considered this, she brought up my half-sister, saying she needed to be enrolled in a private school and that she would pay back the investment when she grew older and began working. I quickly suggested, how about we just finish our dinner in silence and call it a day? My sarcastic remark sent my mom into a rage. She accused me of still being the attention-seeking child who only cared about himself. I acknowledged her criticism, clarifying that I had become the person I was today. I could have lectured them on their behavior, but I didn't see the point. They were aware of the education loan I was trying to pay off, yet still wanted me to allocate my money toward my stepbrother's loan and my half-sister's education. It was frustrating to realize they expected me to work hard to manage my own debts while also helping them. I firmly stated, "I'm done with you guys. You came back into my life only to ask for money. You won't get a penny from me." With that, I left the table, leaving my share of the dinner bill behind. Now I move on to the next story. My wife surprised me with a request for divorce after 10 years of marriage, revealing multiple affairs during that time. Now, she wants me back, but I have already started a new chapter in my life with someone else. My wife, who is 35 years old, and I, at 38, had been married for a decade and shared 2 elementary school-aged children. The first 7 years of our marriage were wonderful. I truly could not have asked for a better partner or mother for my kids. However, the last 3 years proved to be a considerable challenge. We sought help through various counseling sessions, all in hopes of rekindling the connection we once had, yet none of those efforts truly seemed to work. I made numerous attempts to plan special dates and explored countless resources on improving marital relationships. While some of those efforts provided minor improvements, a significant gap persisted that I couldn't bridge, no matter how hard I tried. Towards the end of last year, she blindsided me with the news of her decision to end our marriage, leaving me both shocked and heartbroken. Last year was a challenging time for me, and despite my best efforts, I was completely caught off guard when my wife decided to file for divorce. I had loved her deeply and the news hit me like a brick wall, leaving me utterly devastated. I put forth all my energy to talk to her, hoping to convince her to reconsider, but while she seemed uncertain for a moment, she ultimately stood her ground and insisted on moving forward with the divorce. The reasons behind her decision were unclear to me, and although I was not a perfect husband, acknowledging that I had my own faults, I was a loyal partner who never cheated, was never abusive, and worked hard to be a good provider. I had committed myself entirely to saving our marriage during those exhausting last few years. Not long after she filed, about a month later, I discovered that she was already seeing someone new. Just a month after that, she introduced our children to him. Then, during the discovery phase of the divorce proceedings, she revealed that she had been involved in multiple affairs, starting around the 7th year of our marriage. One of these affairs lasted for at least a year, though she insisted that it involved only a few encounters. The extent of her deception shocked me. I had no idea she was capable of lying to such a degree. The day I learned the truth about her infidelity was the worst day of my life, but it did provide clarity on why our connection had faltered in recent years. I had made every effort to connect with her, but it turned out there were hidden issues I was completely unaware of. Fast forward 6 months later, and after incurring nearly $100,000 in legal fees, she suddenly expressed a desire to reconcile. At the time, she was still dating the same person, but claimed she would end that relationship to focus on rebuilding ours. This sudden change in her heart puzzled me. I suspect it could be due to the fact that I had begun dating someone new, an amazing individual, I might add, or perhaps she realized how significantly her financial situation would change without my income. According to her, the catalyst for her change was seeing how dedicated I was as a father to our children during our time apart. I decided to meet with her and listen to what she had to say, feeling it was the least I could do after spending a decade together. She took accountability for her actions and offered a sincere apology, though she also attempted to partially shift the blame onto me, claiming my behaviors had driven her to cheat. I understand that every story has 2 sides, but I firmly rejected the notion that my actions could excuse her infidelity. Regardless, I sensed her remorse, but ultimately, I chose not to give her another chance and continued with the divorce process, which was finalized just a few weeks ago. Since then, she has been relentless in her attempts to reconnect, texting me almost daily. It has weighed heavily on my heart to see someone I once cared for filled with regret and hurt. Nevertheless, I have remained firm in my decision, as I believe the damage done is too significant for me to ever fully trust her again. Additionally, I am excited about my new relationship with someone who is not only beautiful inside and out but has also shown incredible support and patience throughout this tumultuous time. To clarify, I started dating this new person well after I received the divorce papers. Reflecting on this entire situation emphasizes the surreal nature of it all. Who would willingly try to salvage a marriage after such betrayal? Who would even have the confidence to ask for a chance to fix things? My feelings for her have changed. I do not love her anymore, though I did for a long time. The reality is that the children tie me to her, and co-parenting means I will never entirely escape this woman. It is a difficult situation. I find myself questioning why I am sharing this. Perhaps I am seeking some validation that I am making the right decision. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Any comments or advice are welcome. One thing that troubles me is that she says she will end things with her new partner, but only after I agree to reconcile. I wonder what part of this situation she is not grasping. I have been tempted to inform the other man about how little she thinks of him, but I worry that this might push her to pursue me even harder. He is older than she is, which gives me a bit of satisfaction, but I know that this feeling could be seen as petty. In the end, it is essential to recognize my own worth. I put everything into our marriage and tried my best to make it work. I deserve to maintain my dignity while moving forward. The decision I have made is the right one, and I will continue to be civil for the sake of our children. You have faced two of the hardest situations that anyone could possibly go through. Despite everything that has happened, you have managed to come out of them alive, standing strong, and still whole as a person. This is a significant accomplishment, showing your resilience and strength. So, why would you want to go back and relive all that pain and heartache? It makes little sense to revisit those dark times when you have worked so hard to move beyond them. Consider the person you are dealing with. If she was able to hide her true feelings and actions before, it is clear that she has the ability to do it again. This means that any reconciliation she seeks is not for your benefit or well-being. Instead, it is driven by her own selfish desires. She wants to reconnect not because she cares about you, but because it serves her own interests. In light of all this, the best course of action is to walk away. Don't look back at what was or what might have been. Instead, keep your eyes focused on the future. There is so much more ahead of you, full of opportunities and happiness, waiting for you to discover. Moving forward is the path that will lead to healing and growth.